Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Can't Stop Snapping, the official podcast of MarvelSnapZone.com. A couple of things before we jump into today's episode. First off, there was a patch that we did anticipate this week just based on the timing of patches, but it has been made known that patch is delayed. They were testing it for release and expecting it to release, but they found some other issues as part of that release that they didn't feel comfortable releasing. So they kind of went back to the drawing board a little bit to work through some things before they can release it. They say they hope to get out in the next, couple of weeks or month. Obviously not a specific timeline, but we will obviously cover that patch when it comes, but it looks like it won't be coming immediately as we had anticipated previously. The other thing I wanted to go over really quick is the new season pass. This is the Sword and Shield season pass, referencing the organizations in the Marvel Universe. And the card that you unlock as part of the season pass is Nick Fury. Nick is a 5-cost, 7-power card with the ability, on reveal, add 3 random 6-cost cards to your hand. Very interesting, very unique. I am interested to see, I guess, how people play with this card and what kind of decks they come up with, and we will definitely kind of cover that and cover more about this season pass in a future episode. So look forward to that. That all being said, and without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Can't Stop Snapping, the official podcast of MarvelSnapZone.com. Today we have a very interesting episode for you. Something that we've talked a little bit on this podcast here and there has just come up, obviously, is bots, matchmaking against bots, matchmaking against humans, obviously strategizing around snapping, retreating. But we're going to take kind of an interesting spin on it today, because today I am joined by a player and lover of the game, in-game username as Agent Carter. You may have matched against them before. And Agent Carter potentially has the claim to most cubes that have been gained, a net gain of over 18,000. That is right, 18,000 cubes thus far in the game. And today we're going to talk a little bit about their experience with the game and just some of the things they've picked up kind of from their unique experience of playing almost entirely bots during the last several months. So, Agent Carter, thank you for being here on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it's my 98th day of Snap today. Playing this game for roughly 4 hours a day, every day. I took a holiday actually a week ago, but other than that, playing a lot of games of Snap. I've played 7,000 games, as you say. I've gained over 18,000 cubes during that time. And I've done that with a 70% win rate, and that's mainly because I've played an awful lot of bots. I've been matched against bots, and I've played and beaten a lot of bots. So that's my area of expertise.
Awesome, yeah. It's a very interesting area to kind of discuss. So there's several topics I think we're hoping to discuss. I'll just kind of outline. We're going to talk about matchmaking. We're going to talk about how bots play, how to recognize them, how you kind of play into the bluffing and retreating mechanic with bots, etc. So I'll kind of set the stage a little bit more, for new players out there, if you're listening to this. Normally when you, at least how it's set up now, when you create an account and you go through the kind of the introduction to the game, until you reach rank 40, you're playing basically exclusively bots. But then once you go beyond that point, you can play human players. Now, who you match against is determined by your collection level, your rank level, and your MMR. And so it kind of takes into account a lot of things, your win-loss record, etc. And for people that, kind of have a really, really high win rate or some other things, basically the game algorithm will match you against bots more. And I think that's what's happened to you, Agent Carter, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's also interesting to know. I mean, I was listening to a Cube Rush this week, and that's full of lots of expert Snap players. And it was interesting to overhear that they were saying that they don't like playing against bots because they lose more to bots. And I think part of the reason of this is obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but people are beginning to realize that bots cheat to a certain extent. And I think this is there's a general perception that bots are really hard to beat because of this. And they do have an unfair advantage, that's true. But they also are very predictable. And they don't tend to run the best decks. So hopefully what I can draw out today is just a few strategies to help other players who are struggling to climb because of the bots, help to beat them.
Yeah. Well, let's start there. Let's start there with kind of the how
I wonder if well, sorry to interrupt. I wonder if one of the best places to start is actually just how to recognize the bots, right?
That is that's honestly where my brain was going.
Sorry.
So, yeah, no, those were the top two. So we can definitely start there. So how do you recognize a bot?
Okay, so there's a few indicators. I would say there's no hard and fast way. There's no way to know that you're playing a bot with certainty, and this is because there are actually a few sneaky players, I think, who are masquerading as bots. That's quite rare. So essentially, they're playing in a similar style and using similar avatars, etc., to bots. But so it's hard to know for certain. But there are a few things where you can be reasonably sure that you're playing a bot. So the first indicator is that they only use one of a dozen or so of the default avatars. So these are like the avatars that you start the game with. If you see somebody who is playing with an avatar that you have to unlock, that's almost certainly a human. But if they're just a default avatar, then they might be a bot. The other big giveaway is, and this has become easier to spot since the intros have changed. Remember, they now show you the card back when you start the game.
Yep.
Yeah. So the bots always use that default purple snap card back. Now, of course, players can use that too, but if you see a player using this purple snap card back, it's a reasonable chance it's a bot. The other way is that they often use quite predictable names. So you'll recognize things like adjective noun, like, I don't know, triumphant trombone.
Suspicious orange, or yeah.
Exactly. But they also sometimes use first names. So I think there's different pools that bot names are generated from. So they might just go by George or Sarah. So if you see something like this, reasonable chance it's a bot. Then there's sort of more subtle things to do with how they play. So bots play relatively quickly compared to humans. You'll end your turn and the bot will have decided within half a second or so what they're going to do, whereas a human might not. Might take a bit more time. A big indicator is that they only use pool 3 cards. Sorry, that's completely wrong. The opposite of that. They never use pool 3 cards. So if you see any pool 3 card in their starting deck, it's not a bot. There are some exceptions to this, though, because Agent 13 is one of the most common cards that a bot can run, and that can generate a pool 3 card. Similarly, the hub and things like that. So they can have pool 3 cards in their deck, but they're not going to start with them in their deck. There's a number of other cards they never use, such as Misty Knight, Shocker, Cyclops, The Thing, and Abomination. They don't use Killmonger or Sandman, those 2 cards that got added to pool 2 later in the game. They never emote. They're also the only players that can use that Inkify split effect.
Yep.
And the other thing is you can sometimes tell by the rarity of their cards. So the rarity of bot cards are determined by your collection level. So at the minute, every game I play against a bot, the bot has precisely 1 epic card, 1 legendary card, 5 ultra cards, and 5 infinite cards. So if I see a blue rare card, I know it's not a bot. So they're the main ways. The other thing you can't do during the game, but you can check afterwards, is if you're looking in the log files, their deck is always called deck. So it's a big giveaway after the game is finished if you're checking the logs.
Interesting. Well, there's some of those I knew, right? I think the Inkify one, that everybody kind of that's become very clear because everybody says, "How do I get this?" Developers, and they say, "Oh, you can't. Those are
It's
bots."
coming soon,
Right?
right? Yeah.
But some of those I didn't know. One, I swear, again, I'm thinking back to experiences where I'm making an assumption that maybe this is a bot, maybe it's not,
Sure.
and I'm thinking they can use pool 3 cards. But then when you say these things and I start to kind of put some of the pieces together, it's, oh yeah, there aren't, right? And that's so weird to realize. And obviously that may change in the future.
That is a really good point about changes. Unlike other patch changes,
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to see indicators in the patch when the bots change their behavior. It's not something that I imagine Second Dinner will really talk about. So anything we say today might not be relevant next week.
Yeah.
This is how it world looks to me right now.
Yeah. No, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, you also said one thing I think is funny. People trying to impersonate bots, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I definitely did that. I mean, this is before everybody figured out the naming convention.
Sure.
But my name that I put in the game was Test123.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I kept a default avatar.
Sure.
And this is before the card backs were shown, but I kept a default avatar, and then I played the game, and then people would just spam like hello, like the kind of things you do to kind of see like, is the bot going to respond? Because another thing is bots will not send they won't send the messages in game, right?
Yeah.
And so it was just really funny because people would think, and I'd like message some people afterwards that I like recognize and stuff, and be like, they're like, no way, I thought you were a bot. And
it's a good strategy, right? Because people play differently against bots.
Yeah, they'd kind of like send hello like 5 or 6 times, then they'd snap, right? They'd be like, oh, I'm playing a bot. I can
and
snap.
That was especially true, I think, in the early game, because I think early bots are playing more randomly than the bots that we're really going to focus on today. But and so you can make your opponent believe you're a weaker player back in the early days by pretending to be a bot.
Yeah, but then I got tired of
Sure.
of having the boring avatar, so that definitely kind of gave it away. And I respond to people's messages now. So yeah, okay, well, very interesting. Let's dive into the next topic, which is, how do bots cheat? I mean, I think a lot of people have heard this. I've seen people post about this in Discord, post about it on Twitter. Oh, bots cheat. It's unfair. Yada yada yada. How do they cheat?
Okay. So the first thing to recognize is that not all bots cheat. So particularly if you're playing in the game, first 40 levels, you're not playing against a cheating bot. Chances are you're playing against a bot that is basically choosing cards randomly and playing them down. Even at the higher levels, the bots don't seem to cheat every single game, but they have a play style which I think, they're cheating every single game, but then perhaps not taking full advantage of that. So the way that they cheat is they can see specifically, it's like they're playing with a permanent daredevil effect. So you play a card onto the board and they're going to take account of what you've just played before they choose their own play. And so the way that I think they do this is they're just evaluating how much power your play is put on the board, and they're going through all their possible plays, and they're just sort of looking at the board state at the end of that turn, and then they're trying to maximize some value to do with trying to win as many lanes as possible, and then a tiebreaker on total power or something like that. And so this is why if you play a very control-focused deck, you put down your Professor X, for example, the bot's going to know how much power you've put down, and they can play around this because they're trying to beat you on all the lanes given how much power you've put down. But I think the common misconception is that they are doing more than this. I don't think they're not generating the perfect card when they're playing the Agent 13s or the Hub. They're not cheating the RNG like that, but they are slightly clairvoyant because when they're evaluating the states of what every possible move is going to result in at the end of that turn, they do take into account what the RNG rolls are going to be. So, for example, in Danger Room, you might notice that bots very rarely have things destroyed. Now, this isn't because they're manipulating the RNG explicitly, but they know that that if they play something, they know when that if they play a card in the danger room, it's going to explode. And so they just avoid that. So they'll only play into the danger room, usually, when they know something won't explode. There's a few technicalities about situations where they might play in the danger room anyway. I think specifically if it will manipulate the RNG seed in such a way that a later roll is going to be more favorable for them. But that's quite nuanced. But as a general rule, they're not just generating the perfect cards on the fly. I think there's a lot of misconceptions that bots are, they're waiting to see your play and then they're just changing their hands to have the perfect hand against you. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, very interesting. I think, like you've said, I think a lot of people have said, this is unfair. How could I beat this? Yeah. Right. But again, there are ways to play around this, because there are ways. I don't think that bots can fully understand all of the effects that will happen on something that maybe a card is going to do later, right?
Indeed. They're very greedy. They're very focused on what's going to be the outcome at the end of this turn,
exactly,
rather than the potential benefits. I think the people you're talking about who are complaining that, this is unfair, they're right. This is unfair. The bots do have this unfair advantage, but it is beatable.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. You kind of already gone into some of their blind spots, but one of the things we want to talk about is the fact that bots are kind of terrible at snapping and retreating.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
So let's talk about that.
Okay, so it's sort of hard to predict when a bot is going to snap or retreat. So there's how comfortable, by the way, are you with me talking about some data mine stuff on this podcast? I can.
Very comfortable. Yep.
Okay,
I mean,
fine.
We'll say this is a warning. So if anybody who's listening, if you don't want to know spoilers or things that maybe aren't generally known to everyone, then maybe skip ahead or just don't listen to the rest of this episode. But you can go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't really going to be spoilers as such, just a bit of the nuts and bolts about precisely how things work. So I think those who've looked at the code and know how to do that have discovered that there's sort of a couple of variables that determine whether a bot is likely to snap or retreat. So they have these possible settings. Bot can be set to the do nothing mode, or the passive mode, or standard, aggressive, combative, or extreme. For retreating, they can be set to do nothing, oblivious, standard, or flighty. Now, we don't know precisely how they choose what mode they're going to be in for any given game. I suspect there's an element of randomness, given the observations I've had of playing them. But as a general rule, compared to humans and compared to what I might consider optimal snap play, they don't tend to retreat very much. So when I've been playing bots, less than 10% of the time they have retreated. And I've had games where even when they've completely filled their lane, even when they're losing and have no possible way of winning, even when I snap against them, they'll stay in. Now, they won't always, but it's just to emphasize that there's a very low probability that they're going to retreat. So I claim if you're playing a bot, you should exploit this.
Hey all, I wanted to take a quick moment to talk to you about MarvelSnapZone.com. Marvel Snap Zone is a one-stop shop for everything Marvel Snap on the internet. They have new articles nearly every day that cover deck building, strategy, card breakdowns, etc. They have a great collection tracker tool and a deck list builder that works off of that collection tracker so that you can know what decks you can build with your current card collection. They have guides and deck lists for all level of players and all collection level of players. Make sure to go to MarvelSnapZone.com and check it out now.
So when bots snap, when they're thinking about snapping, it's also a fairly simple process for them. They are looking at if they're just evaluating if they're winning. Now, obviously, there's these different snapping profiles that they could have. But as a general rule, if you want to be looking to bait a snap from the bot. And to do this, it's all about making sure that you stay at a lower power than them. So any decks which can play power late are great against bots because they can bait this snap from them. So I play a lot of discard games, and I use Dracula, because Dracula is a full power card, full cost card with 0 power. So they're evaluating this as being worth nothing on turn 5, for example. They think it's worth nothing. But by turn 6, it suddenly grows because you discard an apocalypse into it.
Yeah, and they as we kind of stated earlier, right? They can't really know the full effects of that at the time. To them, it's wow, this guy's an idiot.
Indeed,
he's playing 0 power and taking up a spot on his board. My chances of winning have increased, by X fold, right?
Now, in turn 6, they understand. They're looking ahead and they see, oh, right, this Dracula is actually going to be worth 20 power or whatever it is. But it's on turn 5 when they're making that stat decision that you want to be low rolling, presenting a lower number than you actually have. Now, Dracula's not the only way to go. I mean, Sarah decks where you play a Sarah on 5 and then you're doing your miracle turn on 6 are great as well for provoking a snap. There's lots of ways.
I think it's interesting because, we've talked a lot about snapping and the art of snapping, the strategy of snapping. And when you're playing a human player, right, you kind of want to do the opposite of what you've said, right?
Absolutely. In some ways. Yeah, this is terrible advice for playing a human.
Yeah, because with a human, if you snap on 5 or 6, they're saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. They're going to do something that, if you're being snapped against, you're saying, oh, they're going to win, or they know something I don't, or they're going to play something down, or they drew the card they needed, right? And so you're going to retreat, right?
Absolutely.
So with humans, you want to try to go earlier if you can, turn 3, turn 4, because then the person may say, well, I can stay in, I may still win. But with bots, very interesting. It kind of flips, like you're saying. So you kind of have to be able to play both strategies, and that's why some of these identifiers of that you're playing a bot are really important, because
absolutely
it allows you to win cubes, kind of maximize your cube wins in both scenarios.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. So very interesting. So I'd love to talk more about bot decks, and you said at the beginning, and I think we've all kind of felt it, but maybe we haven't analyzed it very closely. The bots seem to use kind of only a certain set of decks or kind of archetypes or strategies when they're playing. So maybe let's talk through what some of those are.
Okay, so I think this is where my real area of expertise compared to a lot of the community comes in. I've done a lot of work to analyze precisely what these bot decks are. Now, the developers tell us that every bot deck is handcrafted. That might be true, but I think there's essentially 10 different archetypes. And within these archetypes, they tend to play a lot of common cards. So if you can recognize which archetype you're playing, you have a huge advantage, right? Because you can predict what other cards they're going to play. So the 10 archetypes are, there's a discard deck that we play a lot. So this always runs Blade, Wolverine, Lady Sif, Swordmaster, Strong Guy, and Apocalypse. But the other cards, there's a bit more variety. There's a non-revealed deck, which is your classic White Tiger Odin deck. There's a Destruction deck, which has about 8 cards in common every time it comes up. It's worth learning what these 8 cards are. I should say I have a spreadsheet with all of this information in, which I don't know if it might be appropriate to link this with the podcast at some point.
Yeah, we can share it out on the socials.
Cool. There's the Move deck, which is always running your Heimdall and your Vulture. But also it's worth knowing that although it doesn't always run it, it has an Ironheart. So 80% of the time it's also running an Ironheart, and that can surprise people in the Move deck. There's sort of a classic Zoo deck, which runs your Angela, Bishop, Kazar, and often runs a blue Marvel. So it's worth knowing that if you sort of see Angela, Bishop, Kazar, maybe a blue Marvel's coming. There's a sort of collector-focused deck which runs no 6-drops at all. It sort of runs White Queen, Moon Girl, and the Collector, and things like Cable and Sentinel. And it's sort of designed to put power into the Collector. Two of the most common types of decks are your ongoing decks. About half of them run Onslaught, half of them run Spectral. And this is one of the trickiest tactical decisions when playing against a bot, is to try and predict, is it going to play an Onslaught on 6 or is it going to play a Spectrum? So there's some indicators of cards that can run which might favour, this is going to be an Onslaught, this is going to be a Spectrum. There's also a very weird deck which actually runs 2 6-drops. And this one is really telegraphed because it always runs Silver or Domino. And then it runs like a Breach. It can pull the Infernaut, but then it runs Odin and another 6-drop. This is the only deck that you'll ever see that runs 2 6-drops. So that's worth knowing, right? That you're never going to see more than one 6-drop unless it's precisely this Quicksilver Domino weird deck. Now, the advantage of learning these archetypes is you can record what cards you see, and you can use this, and this is predictive power. So I've got lots of stats. Some of them aren't going to surprise anybody. If you see a White Tiger, if you bot play a White Tiger, there's a 94% chance it's going to play an Odin. If you see an Iron Fist, there's a 92% chance it's going to play a Heimdall. But there's other stats, such as if you see a Colossus, there's an 80% chance you're going to see it's going to play a Mr. Fantastic, or it's going to have a Mr. Fantastic in its deck. Or if you see a Watu, there's a 55% chance it has a Hobgoblin. So I've got lots of these stats which have a lot of predictive power, so that when I'm playing a game, if I see a card, I can just flag up for myself what else is it likely to play. And if you can predict what the bot's going to play, then you can play around those predictions.
Yeah, that is very fascinating. Like you said, I think I have mentally tried to capture this data, but there's just so much, right? And I've played lots around. I played lots of Marvel Snap, but without recording it, sometimes I still get tripped up, right? Because I forget, like you say, the Ironheart thing, right?
Indeed.
The Ironheart in the on reveal deck, right? Or I think no, sorry, it was the move deck. That's not something you see coming, but if you pay attention to the patterns, you will recognize it's coming, which is infinitely more helpful, right?
It gives you an edge.
Yeah,
against
so very interesting. One thing I did want to state that I think we forgot to mention earlier, more and more people are getting variants, obviously, but not always, but often the bots have, like you say, kind of higher upgraded cards depending on your collection level, but also they often have a lot of variants in their deck, right?
That is a good observation. Yeah, I don't have stats on that, but I believe you're correct. They tend to run a lot of the variant cards. So another indicator.
Because one of the decks you were describing, the discard deck with Wolverine and Lady Sif, etc. That deck, almost every time I play against it, almost every card in that deck is a variant, right?
Yeah. I think that might be something to do with your collection level too. I imagine that's generated based on your collection level. The higher your collection level, I think perhaps the higher the likelihood that they have variants or rarer cards.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see, but that would make sense because that seems how a lot of these things scale, right? With the collection level. Well, awesome. So now we understand a little bit better about the decks, and we'll make sure to help get that spreadsheet shared. And I think a lot of people can learn from that. I mean, I can learn from that, right? Again, one of my downfalls is just sometimes not remembering some of these nuanced details. I'd love to talk about, you kind of alluded to it a little bit, of some of the cards that play well against bots, such as Dracula, Sarah. But I'd love to just talk more about that, designing decks to beat bots, and
Yeah.
is that something that's worth doing? If that's what you're designing around.
Sure. So I think for me, because I'm playing at the minute about 90% bots, it's definitely worth me building a deck to beat the bots. But every player should make this decision themselves based on what they're playing. If you're not playing a lot of bots, it's better to focus on building a deck to play humans. But if you're trying to climb and you're perhaps struggling against some of the bots, and you're playing a lot of bots, then it can definitely be worth focusing your deck design around what's good against bots. So I think, we've alluded to this. Play decks which which can play power late. Those decks will often do reasonably well against humans too. But there's a few subtleties which we haven't really touched upon about precisely how the decks play. So, for example, precisely how the bots play. So, for example, bots have a very strong aversion to fill a lane before turn 5. And so you can exploit this a bit by playing a green goblin, for example. So often I will see on turn 4, a bot will have 3 cards in a lane. And even though it's cheating, there's something that's overriding its logic to say, actually, I don't want to fill this lane. And so it won't fill a 3-card lane itself, allowing you to just put a green goblin in there for it. And a green goblin is perhaps not a card that I would run against a human, but it is a powerful tech card against a bot. Whether that's worth playing is just a function of what percentage of games you play against bots or humans.
Interesting. Yeah, I have noticed that, right? Obviously, a human may be willing to fill up a part of their board at any point in the game, then it makes sense for them, right? But a bot, sometimes I'm like, really? You didn't play there yet?
Which is surprising, given that they're often cheating.
Yeah. But like you say, maybe there's some other piece of the bot AI logic where it's, hey, I want to keep my options open until closer to the end of the game, right?
Yeah, I think as a rough rule of thumb, it's just that they don't want to fill lanes unless it's like the last couple of turns of the game.
Yeah,
there are a few exceptions, but for example, they will play a deathlock into a lane, but they're evaluating that after they do that, they're still going to have fewer than 4 cards in that lane.
Yeah, so I mean, like theoretically, whether this is the best card to play in this instance or not, like if you had a wave and Professor X in your deck, right?
Yeah.
And you know that you're kind of ahead in power by turn 4, and you're able to get Professor X played down a turn early. I mean, that could also be to your advantage. It sounds like.
I hadn't really considered that. You'd have to get.
You'd have to be up in power, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like. How much does Wave cost?
Wave is a 3-cost, 3-power card.
Yeah. So
yep. So you'd be able to play the 5-cost Professor X a turn early, but obviously that's only 6 power by itself. So you would have to be probably have a 3rd card there already, 3rd or 4th card there already that allows you to have enough power to win the location.
Sure. Yeah, I should say I haven't tested that interaction, but that certainly sounds plausible. And so I'd encourage people to experiment with things like that against bots, because finding these predictabilities
definitely requires a little more setup than something like you say, a Green Goblin, kind of taking advantage of them not wanting to fill until late, right? Because that's a single card that can be played on turn 3, right?
Yeah.
So definitely at least by turn 3, but also later. So
sure. I mean, you've probably noticed that they don't play into Dark Dimension once that's revealed until the end of the game as well. And that's because they're evaluating what happens if I play into Dark Dimension now. That card's not going to get revealed, therefore it's going to be worth 0. So why would I do that? That's why bots don't play into Dark Dimension until the end of the game. So it's things like that which make bots quite predictable. And if you're aware of these things and thinking about them, then you can use this to gain an advantage over them.
Well, this has all been very interesting. I mean, like you say, I'd be interested to see just how this changes over time, because bots aren't going away, right? I mean, they're never going to be like, oh, no bots, only human players, right? Because they need to fill in the gaps of either people that are off the charts and or just hey, there's nobody matching right now that kind of matches your rank, your collection level. We need to give you somebody to play, right?
Yeah.
I know they've said they kind of have I want to say they have a goal of a matchmaking taking 5 seconds or less for all players, right? And so I think that probably plays a little bit into here of, hey, if there's not a player that kind of matches where you're at in the game in those 5 seconds, or give or take, then maybe you're more likely to get a bot, right? So I think potentially for some people, the time of day you're playing, I'm not saying I know what that time is, but definitely can affect this as well, the amount of bots you play, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's one way to. If you play at an unusual time, you do see more bots.
Yeah,
I mean, you're right. I think the developers believe, and I have no reason to doubt them, that people are going to be playing less bots once this game properly launches, because there's just going to be so many more players, and it's going to be easier for the matchmaking algorithm to find a human for them to play against. So I suspect this is just this problem of playing lots of bots is very much a closed beta problem right now, which will just naturally go away.
Yeah, but we will see. I mean, maybe we'll have to revisit this topic in the future because, that maybe is the developer's goal, but it's still depending on how, when, how you play, right, etc. There may be ways to kind of, I don't want to say cheese yourself, but like basically you could maybe force to play against bots a little bit more.
I mean, a really easy way to play against lots of bots is just to lose a lot of games, because it happens at the other end of the scale too. People who've been farming season pass XP also play a lot of bots. So if you're very keen to play bots for some reason, that's a very easy way of doing it. Just lose a lot of games.
Yeah, I know that a few people we've had on the podcast before, most notably, I think Carbon, who's been very active, in the Discord and stuff. I mean, he's done that since the beginning, since the first season. And, when he does that for the first few days, he'll finish the season pass, I want to say, in like 2 to 3 days, all 50 levels. And then he tries to win, right? He's not like retreating. And they've tweaked this a little bit, but it takes several days for him to kind of get back into a spot where he's matching against humans, right? He has to win X amount of games to kind of them say, okay, you can play against humans again. So yeah, very interesting, very, very nuanced in that way.
Josh, what's your experience? Do you play a lot of bots, or are you mainly playing humans? What's your rank? What's your collection level like?
So my collection level is sitting around, I want to say 1700, 1800. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head right now. I have been a free-to-play player other than the season passes. So that's where I'm sitting at now. I'm missing about 28, 29 cards from Pool 3 that I haven't unlocked yet. And I have generally, I've said this before, so it's not that embarrassing, but I usually make it to about rank 70. That's the season passes. It's like I make it to 70, I drop to 40, and then I make it back to 70. And that's kind of like my minimum goal, is to make it back to 70. There's been times I've pushed close to 80, really close to the end of the season, but I haven't quite made it. But honestly, the things we've talked about today, I think, are going to be very helpful to me.
And do you find you're playing lots of bots, or are you playing?
I feel that I haven't kept track of it as closely as you have, but I would say anecdotally that maybe somewhere around 30%, 35% of what I'm playing is bots that I've registered for sure, right? Okay, they have the inked background, or the card, the upgraded cards, right? There's some of these things where I'm like, okay, yeah, I mean, this is I'm playing 2 or 3 bots in a row, right? But there's other times where it's I know it's human, because either I recognize the player, I've played them before, I recognize their name, or it's just very obvious because of Pool 3 cards or something that they're doing that it's a human. I think I'm going to start to keep track of it a little more closely and see how that changes over time, because there probably have been times where I'm playing bots, but because I didn't know some of the things that you brought up, I wasn't registering it. So that number may be a little higher.
Well, with the spreadsheet I'm going to share, I've got a little tool where you can just join a game, type in the cards that you're seeing, and it will give a prediction of what other cards they're going to play, which might help.
No, yeah, that's amazing. And And I'm sure people are listening to this saying, "Oh my gosh, I need to get that right now, ASAP." So, because I do know that we have a lot of listeners that are kind of in that top, 5%, if you will, of playtime,
Yeah.
and that are playing this a lot, and have made it to rank 100 and are playing lots of bots in that way. So, one thing I'd love to ask you, first I'd love to ask you, what's your favorite card or what's your most played card thus far in almost 100 days?
Okay. Right. The most played card is much easier to answer. It's Angela. I think I've played Angela in basically every deck ever. Certainly, like I would expect at least 6,000 of the 7,000 games I've played. Probably a bit more than that, because it's in most of the games. I've mainly played discard and swarmy decks. And so I'm having no trouble filling a lane. So in most games, Angela's just a 2/7, and at worst, at worst she's a 2/1, and that's pretty terrible. But yeah, really, really powerful card that just fits into many, many decks that I like to play.
Yeah.
What is my favorite card? That is a good question. So probably my favorite card is a card that I don't have, which is Mr. Negative. I just think it's a really interesting way of flipping the game on its head. And I think it changes a lot of the rules, a lot of the ways that you think about deck design.
Yeah. No, definitely. Mr. Negative, I think, obviously not everyone's favorite, but definitely one of those ones that I see often lots of people saying that it's one of their top cards or cards they want the most. And I think it's just because some cards are just great, great cards to include, right? Bishop, Angela, right? I mean, that's something that a lot of people use in a lot of different decks. But I wouldn't say that a lot of people would say necessarily that Angela is their favorite card. Similarly, it's a good card. But there's some kind of build around cards where you can do very unique things. Obviously, Mr. Negative being one of those. So,
sure. I should also say that I'm a big advocate of using some sort of location removal. So at the minute, I'm mainly using Magic, but if you don't have that, I think Scarlet Witch is a brilliant card and can really give you an advantage to just play around. You either can get rid of a location that really doesn't suit you, but really you should be thinking about what locations might be advantaging your opponent, and you can get rid of those. So it's a great little card.
Yeah, I mean, I unlocked Magic a few weeks ago, and at first I was trying to be, the opposite of the mainstream. So I said, I'm not going to play with Magic. Everybody's playing with Magic, and so I did that for a week or two. And then I was like, okay, I'll start playing with Magic. Oh man, I haven't stopped playing with Magic since I started. So I've fallen into the mainstream, same as everybody else, playing a lot of Magic. So I'm interested to see, this is kind of diverged from our conversation, but just interested to see where Magic and Mr. Negative fall on the plane of being not touched or nerfed. Right. I definitely don't think they're going to ever be buffed.
Sure.
But I know some people have some very strong feelings one way or the other.
I mean, it's sort of noteworthy that the previous version changes, which have done the nerfs and the buffs, they've really focused on pool 1 and pool 2, right? And that's because these are the cards that everybody has, and these are the ones which people are seeing game after game after game. With Mr. Negative, my experience is I'm not seeing it every game. So it might be that second dinner just don't see it as a problem card yet, but that might change over time.
Agreed. And that's kind of what I think as well. Again, what I always say is I don't have the data. I'm not a developer, right? So it's obviously just our experiences we have. But Mr. Negative, I mean, people play Mr. Negative decks, but it's like you say, I maybe play a couple times a day. There are other archetypes that I play much more frequently against humans than Mr. Negative. So yes, it's a powerful card, but it's also a card that can kind of not play out well for you, right?
Sure.
And if you don't draw it, I mean, if your whole deck's built around it, then you're retreating a lot of the time. So
I mean, 2 months ago, there were a lot of terrible Mr. Negative decks. I mean, really fun decks, don't get me wrong, but decks from a trying to win perspective were pretty awful. I think nowadays the modern Mr. Negative builds are actually pretty powerful. I think people are beginning to figure out that part and how to do it well.
Yeah. So very interesting. Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today. Agent Carter, I just wanted to say very appreciated that you're willing to kind of share your knowledge, share your research. You've obviously put a lot of time into playing the game, but also analyzing the game and kind of quantifying the data for a lot of people. So very helpful. Really appreciate you being on. Before we go, I just love to give you a chance. Is there anything you'd like to give a shout out about, whether that's a place people can follow you on social media, a way they can follow some of your thoughts or conversations in the Discord, any specific channels they can watch out for you in?
So I guess I'm in the main Discord. I have a Twitch channel. I'm not the most prolific Twitch streamer, but you can find me at Agent Carter Snap on Twitch, where I tend to showcase a few of my games against bots and show off my predictor tool. So I guess you can find me there occasionally.
Awesome. Yeah. So everybody, make sure to go follow Agent Carter on Twitch. Turn on that notification so when he does go live, you can hear that, obviously. Again, Agent Carter, just want to say thank you one more time for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I have followed this podcast since the very start, and it's been very exciting to join you today. So thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Well, with that being said, we're coming to the end of our episode. Listeners, as always, thank you for being here and supporting the podcast and listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. Can't Stop Snapping is a podcast written, recorded, produced, and hosted by Michael Thurman. Thanks for listening.